Hello, folks, and welcome to Osquery Office Hours. It's the end of January. Still kind of chilly here in Boston. Hopefully the weather is good where everyone else is. Anyhow, first agenda item is announcements or highlights. I don't know that I have any. I guess we cut a release. It's probably floating out in the world.
Been pushed to our stable channel for 2 weeks now, I think. Since like the day after it was declared stable.
Yeah, that's right. We even called that stable already. Where is it in Collide Land? Collide Land. It's still only on our beta channel, but that probably is only. No, I lie. We did push that to stable. Excuse me. That went to stable. So yes, well, wonderful. No problems. Go everyone. Okay, next section is sort of open questions, issues, PRs, anything people want to discuss. It's meant to be kind of just a bit of an open section. Okay. Agenda items. Someone wrote something in here about IntelliJ plugins.
Oh, I might have put that in the wrong section.
It doesn't matter. I just edit it as you go.
Sorry about that. I think I brought this up 2 weeks ago about potentially putting IntelliJ plugins into Osquery core. I did a significant amount of research around it, and the good news is we can do it. The unfortunate news is that the data resides in jar files, which is a jar file, just for context, is pretty much a zip file with some different headers. So we can, of course, inspect those files. We can use, we have a zip processing library already in Osquery that we can use to stream the files and try to inspect them. But the question is the significant performance impact of going through lots of jar files, and if that's something we're okay with, or even the process of inspecting jar files. Is that go against Osquery core kind of conventions and standards? If so, I think the other option is I can write a standalone extension for this, so that way we can still have this functionality, but it doesn't have to go in Osquery core. So the good news and bad news of that investigation. So I'm just wondering what people's thoughts are on potentially, iterating through, especially if someone has a lot of IntelliJ plugins, like, dozens of jar files.
How expensive is that actually?
I guess it depends on the size of the file, obviously, but some of the ones that I was experimenting with, it took anywhere from 250 milliseconds to 750 milliseconds to stream per file.
Per jar file, and there's one jar file per IntelliJ plugin?
Oh, that's the problem. If it was that easy, I would be much more slated to that. But the way that IntelliJ works is it doesn't really enforce a convention. So potentially we could be scanning through, dozens of jar files per plugin to find the version. There's no rhyme or reason to exactly where the data resides, which is unfortunate.
And you're saying you kind of have to scan through everything to get the fields that you need. The version, let's say, is in one of those jar files, but you don't know which.
Yeah. So we can. What it does is it orders these jar files in some suspected ordering, and then it starts from the top and it scans through them, and then when it finds it, it's like, okay, I can exit early. I don't have to look through all of them, but pessimistically speaking, it could be scanning through all the jar files in a plugin.
And is that using a lot of CPU resources, like on archiving them?
I mean, it's not great for sure because it has to use I forget what compression. I should have picked that up, but it has to stream it. Like we obviously don't want to extract these to disk and then read them from disk. That would not be great. So the streaming aspect of it does take some amount of resources that is not insignificant.
I think from sort of a project ideology privacy perspective, I don't think streaming jar files is a bad idea. So it was one of your questions, and maybe Zach or Alessandro Stefano would disagree, but like from that
Seems fine to
perspective,
me.
it seems fine. And I think the only thing that matters is the performance question.
Okay.
Just to say,
Yeah,
I
I
think the
guess
other one's fine.
yeah, the thing that comes to mind for me is like on a standard system with a standard like set of plugins for IntelliJ, is this query going to be so resource intensive that it triggers the watchdog? Like, so are we building a table that's going to like not work by default for a lot of people?
Gotcha.
That would be like my concern. If it's like, yeah, it takes several seconds to return results, like we have other tables that do that. I think we were even just discussing another one the other day. Was that in
Wi-Fi network names?
yes, the Wi-Fi one, right? Where someone was pointing out like, well, this takes a few seconds, but it's actually almost all like sleep time. It's just waiting for IO.
There's a sort of maybe other question here. If you're scanning these plugins, I would expect them to have a consistent, they don't change frequently. So there should be caching routes here as well.
And then we have like some caching in Osquery table, so I don't really remember how it works.
It's very ad hoc. So Stefano implemented caching on the Windows users and groups, which is sort of like a separate thread maybe that just kind of hangs out and does caching. Zach, you were maybe looking at caching for something, but I can't remember what. But we mostly do not have caching, and there's no comprehensive answer.
You could do like in-memory caching of these kind of things, like, you know, if the hash of the files hasn't changed, just use the last value we got from that set of files. And so then the first time the query runs, maybe it takes 10 seconds, but then the next time's usually it's taking like 0.001 because we're just reading the cached values, or maybe a little longer because we still do have to look on disk and see whether like the file hash has changed, but we don't actually have to do all the processing.
Yeah, that's my sense too, is just some in-memory cache where you're like, this didn't change. I suspect it's not worth persisting that cache to RocksDB.
It just starts to kind of get more complex. Yeah, I mean, I think Constantine, what I would try to do is, it seems like it's going to work in some way. So I guess my approach that I would probably take is like, build it the simple, naive way with no caching. Use a standard, not like super powered system with 10 plugins installed or whatever we think is like a normal-ish amount, and then just like see what the resource consumption is that Osquery reports and whether the watchdog ever triggers from the query running. And if it doesn't trigger the watchdog, then I'd say, call it good there. And if it is triggering the watchdog, then it's like, okay, we're gonna have to do some caching. But that caching should be not that hard to do. It won't be trivial, but it wouldn't be like crazy, I would think.
Caching won't help with watchdog issues. I don't think. Because you'd have to get through the first one.
Oh, true, Zach. You have to get through the first one. Okay. Good point. To actually get the cache.
I mean,
well, I guess.
But so I would say not everyone runs the watchdog, and if we end up in a world where, like, today we have a world where if you set your watchdog so aggressively, you will preclude some standard queries. So
Yeah.
you can't, there's a balance of like, yeah, you can do that, but so maybe the question ends up being, if you just implement this naively, does a straightforward watchdog trigger, are you exploding out 200 megs of memory? Can we optimize that? What are these thresholds? And it might just be fine. And if someone goes and like cranks the watchdog to being hyper aggressive, then I mean, it's not much to be done.
Yeah, I guess overall, my feeling would be like, try it the naive way, and we'll see if we need to try to figure out something. I'm also remembering we have this table delay. What is that? Oh, that's right, that applies to all table generate functions. Okay, so that's
Also wanted to add that the default values we are shipping the watchdog with are already kind of low anyway, and I mean they can be easily triggered by querying certain tables or even enabling events, and especially there's the issue where the CPU is a percentage over the CPU, and so depending on the CPU, like it's not some fixed value. So yeah, that the settings we ship Osquery with are not necessarily the ones that we have deeply thought of, that they do not they do not risk the tables to trigger the limit. So again, I'm not sure if we want to base ourselves necessarily on those defaults.
maybe
Because
there's an argument to be
they are
like
very
upping the
variable.
defaults.
Yeah, but still, like 10% of one core machine is different from 10% than a 32 cores machine anyway. So even if it's more than that.
That is a good point. Well, okay. Well, yeah. I mean, ends up being kind of orthogonal to the concern of implementing this specific table, but it does come to mind to me that maybe like giving more ways to configure the watchdog, such as saying whether I want to be looking at CPU across my total number of cores or across a single core. I don't know. Maybe that is something that we should be looking at in the future.
My memory is that the watchdog is very imperfect. Like it's sort of trying to monitor process utilization via an external, effectively process listing, looking for something named Osquery.
Yeah.
So if we wanted to clean the watchdog up, I feel like the first thing I might do is make the reporting.
Well, it's not just
reliable.
something named Osquery. It's the child process of the watchdog process, so it knows the PID that it's looking for.
That's better than I realized.
But then it's just like querying the Osquery like table, looking at the like it's looking at the results of the processes table, looking at how many cycles were used and how much time went by, and doing a crude calculation. It's crude. It is crude.
It's a hard
Gets
problem.
the job done in a lot of places as well. I don't know. I guess all of this is to say, it seems worth doing the naive implementation, Constantine, especially if you've already got like some code that's doing this outside of Osquery, like putting it into Osquery table format is probably not hard, or maybe you even already have it in Osquery table format.
I don't yet. I think.
Okay, but I think translating it from just like C++ to like a you know, if you look at an example of a Osquery table, you see like you just have to implement the function. Like that's not that hard. So I probably would go to that step and then just see how bad does this seem, and then we'll figure out ways to optimize it if we need to. And I think there are possible ways that we could find to optimize it.
Yeah. The good part is that
Somehow.
most of these jar files are under like 5 megabytes. So I don't think,
Okay.
yeah, they're not like massive directories of, you know, dozens of megs. So,
Okay. Well, good.
okay, sounds good. I think next sprint in Fleet, we have this slated. So I'll be working on it then, and we'll see what the performance is like.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
That's everything we have on our agenda.
I guess something else I'd like to bring up is my PR for the like events optimization expiry, the bug where we found in certain cases that Osquery could drop a bunch of events without ever logging them. And
I
Steph,
approve
I
of
know
that.
you approved the PR. Thank you. I was hoping that I could get Alessandro to take a look at it, since I know I've seen in the the commit logs that you've worked a lot on that, Alessandro. I wonder if it's possible you'd have time in the before the next release goes out, which we haven't even decided when that is, to take a look.
Yeah, I will take a look at it.
It's a small PR.
Sorry. Yeah.
It is.
I don't know.
It's a very small number of lines, but it might take a while to like reabsorb all of the context of how expiration works and optimization works and stuff. And I had wanted to do like an automated test that reproduced the actual bug, but then it turned out that the ways that it was going to require a lot of refactoring, and the ways that the tests currently are working was not a good model for like really kind of end-to-end testing the whole thing. So the tests are updated to show that the behavior matches what's expected, but sort of grokking it all end-to-end might be challenging. It might not, though. It's a simple concept. The concept is like, don't expire the last events. Like, make sure we at least leave one set of events, and the sets of events are all the events for a certain timestamp in seconds, because that's the way that we build up the indexes. It looks like something that's something that you did, Alessandro. So you're probably familiar with that. So don't expire the last set of events if it's the only set of events that we would have, because the next time Osquery restarts, it decides what event ID to use based on what events are in there. And so if we expire the last ones, then event IDs restart at 1, whereas the optimize thinks that we need to be looking at events, any number greater than 1, 4,559. So then a bunch of events could come in before the query runs again, and then we just miss all of those, because the first time the query runs, it starts looking only at event IDs over 4,000. But really, I think the event IDs should just always be monotonically increasing. They should never be resetting at 1.
So the reason I was originally suggesting the reindex approach of the keys was that we may still end up with a database that is not following this convention, either because it is an old database that wasn't migrated to the new format, or because something broke, like, I don't know, Osquery crashed, and we end up with that key that is missing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is going to cover this specific case.
It covers it. It definitely fixes the reproduction steps that I reported. I don't know that that's the only way to trigger something similar, and I do have a suspicion that our customer was triggering it some other way, but it was very unreliable to reproduce. and it was reproducing over and over for them, but I could never get it to reproduce until I figured out these specific steps. But then with these steps, it only reproduces once on the first query after the issue happens. So it definitely fixes this case. I also added some logging. I added a warning log when we detect that the optimize ID seems to be out of sync with the actual event IDs. So that, and with a little bit of information, hopefully that will help for debugging similar issues in the future. So yeah, it's a few lines of code that resulted from like several days of going in circles around the whole thing. I think it's better. It may not cover every single case, but it tries to leave things better than it found it, while definitely getting at least this one case.
So I may have missed that part. So does that mean that if the database is already ill-formed, this will just not do anything, or will it log something?
If the database is already, you said deformed?
Ill-formed, sorry.
Ill-formed, yeah. If the database is already ill-formed. So at least for the specific bug that I saw here, the Osquery self-corrects after the first time the query runs when this condition happens. So you lose all of the events that should have been considered for the query the first time it runs, which could be like a lot potentially. But then the optimize identifier gets set back to the new like highest identifier that was considered, and then Osquery starts working again on future ones. What this change will do is it will prevent that case from happening in the future, at least when it's because of the specific reason around expiration, but it won't fix that for the ill-formed database. What it will do is add a warning that says this, I can't remember exactly, but it says basically this probably resulted in data loss. Like, here's some values that you can use to understand this and report it. And then I think if people report those, then we should be able to look and say, okay, this looks like it was the issue, which sorry that it happened there. There wasn't really much we could do there, but it should stop moving forward. Or we might see like, oh, this actually seems like a different issue that we also need to fix.
I think I will help with the code review.
Thank you. Yeah, not a huge rush, but I would like to get this in before the next release. I know we haven't even started talking about when that is, but I feel like maybe try and do it in February.
Sorry, that was probably a question for me. We often aim for every 2 months, so we did the last one roughly December 31st, so end of February.
Yeah.
So sorry, I was trying to think. One question about that. You say that the event issue. You say that the event when things are expired gets reset to 1, or when it tries to reindex the database and the database is empty, so no events in there.
Yeah. So it requires a pretty specific sequence of events. So like, let's say, so if you start up Osquery and it expires out all the last events, it does that after calculating the index. And so then any new events would get the appropriate, like, monotonically increasing index, and the bug wouldn't happen.
Okay.
The biggest issue would be if the issue happens when Osquery, or at least this was the easiest way to reproduce it that I found to reliably reproduce it. Osquery starts, it expires all the events. In memory, it knows the right next ID to use. But then before it actually gets another event, it shuts down for whatever reason.
Hmm.
Then when it restarts again, it rebuilds the index, but now there was nothing in the index, so it sees, okay, like I'm using event identifier 1.
Yeah. Yeah, Alessandro. Yeah, well, I mean, we can also discuss this offline with Alessandro, but I was thinking that I'm not sure how you can handle that in all cases, even when correctly, even when a database is like corrupted. Because one way would be, but you still need caveat. You still need some data to be present in the database, just to say something about the IDs. You can use like generational IDs, basically, which you have the IDs that you can increment. You can even reuse if you want, and then you have a second number that represents the generation, and the generation could be increased. I have to think about this, but for instance, every time an expiration is done, or basically the idea is that what gets stored as an ID in the optimization side, when you get a DB that is corrupted, is not even the one that was originally created by that instance of Osquery, or even, again, that case you say the DB is empty, but you still have the information of the optimization ID, then there is a mismatch between the generation, and it knows that it has to also reset the optimization ID to the one that is being regenerated from the empty DB. So they match again. But then again, I can think simply there's a case where you can get the optimization ID is stored in the database. And so if that can still be incorrectly having the generation to matching with whatever is written for the events, and you still lose events because it's incorrect.
Yeah, and so when I was thinking through this, I realized there are a number of possible ways to fix it. Most of them seemed like they would require having to like write new or different data to the database. Like they just seemed like they'd be bigger changes. And what I kind of came up with is that if we expire a few less events in this specific edge case, we don't get to the place where we have an MTDB, and then that means we don't have to start writing edge cases for how to handle the optimization and stuff when we have an MTDB. And furthermore, because the optimization like does its job, we aren't getting like duplicate logging or something. It doesn't break the optimization. So yeah, I mean, guys, please take a look at this. Let me know if you have better ideas. This was what I came up with. It seemed like the simplest possible change without having to do a lot of other changes. And if someone else wants to advocate strongly for a different approach, like I'm open to it. But I'd also think that like maybe we should merge this and think about a bigger refactor to the event stuff if we're really motivated, or I don't know. But please do take a look and let me know. Thank you.
Okay. Other topics? Would people like to call it a day and take 30 minutes back?
Yes, I will read some PRs. I think there are various PRs that are about ready for merging.
Awesome. Thank you.
All
Okay.
right.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.